Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
The list is out. What list, you may say? The 250 best managed companies of 2024 list just came out a few weeks ago, Wall Street Journal article, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And Mark, I know you saw the list. I saw the list. I want us to talk about this list, and I want us to talk today about this idea of management versus leadership, some things I think we can learn here. So let's dive in here, man. I'm excited to hang out with you today and talk about some of these what I would call well-run companies. They must be well-run. They made this list. So let's dive in.
Let me quickly say that you and I have spent our entire adult life trying to learn from the best. And so if somebody thinks these are the 250 best, then my mind immediately goes to what can we learn from them? What principles and practices might be transferable to what we're doing and to what our listeners are doing.
That's a fantastic reminder. And I want to say something to our listeners, because there may be somebody out there who has a small little dry cleaner with 3 employees, or you may have a team with 15, kids on it, or maybe you're running a school and you got 40 teachers, and you may think, well, none of these companies have anything to do with what we're doing. And I would beg to differ. And I think there's be some things that we can learn today that will actually help us, no matter how big or small the enterprise that we've all rolled up our sleeves. We're trying to make a difference. I think there's some things we can learn that's going to help us get better today. So I'm excited about this. So let's jump into the list, Mark. I want to read off actually the top 5. These will not be a surprise. Actually, one of them may be a surprise, but these won't really be a surprise to most people. We've got Apple, number 1, NVIDIA ended number 2, Microsoft, and then Intel. Those were the top 4. And then MasterCard, they cracked the top 5, actually jumping several spots. Did I read they were 24 last year or something like that? I mean, they made a huge leap. And I think there's a point to some of their mindset that made that happen. But those are the companies that you would think would be up there. I mean, these are massive technology companies making a huge dent when it comes to revenue. Everything we're doing in life now is it feels like it's in this technology vein. It's just risen to such prominence here. But these companies are doing something right. And so I think there are some things that we can learn from them.
Yeah. And so just a quick word for those that may not have seen that particular article. I think you said it's in the Wall Street Journal. You may want to go back and read it. But one of the questions that will probably come to mind immediately is, well, based on what? How did these organizations make it to this list? And is it a coincidence that 4 of the 5 are technology companies? And what were the criteria and how were these organizations evaluated? And so there were several things that were used to create an index. I'll not go into all the details. In fact, I don't know all of the details. I know that there was an independent firm that was contracted with to do the analysis. The research was sponsored by the Claremont School. I think, help me with the name there, Randy. It's the Drucker Institute.
The Drucker Institute, I believe, at Claremont. Yeah. And there were 800. They took Drucker's. Peter Drucker, and you and I are fans. Peter Drucker was a management and leadership guru, I don't know, 75 years ago, whatever, and on. And they took 5 criteria that basically they graded, and I believe, Mark, it was 842 companies that they graded on these 5 criteria. And I'll read the criteria here. I've got them. It's customer satisfaction, innovation, social responsibility, employee engagement and development, and then financial strength. And so those are the criteria, 842 companies, and they came up with the top 250. And we can dive into any of those criteria that you want to talk about here. But
well, here's what I would ask you, and you and I have not talked about this. Were there any surprises maybe something on that list that you didn't anticipate? Or was there anything on your personal list that you think, I'd have to add something to it if I were evaluating these companies?
Well, that's funny that you say that, because I was going to ask you the same question, because when I read the list, to me, it feels like, and this is not going to surprise anybody that I would say this, it feels like leadership should be somewhere reflected. And you might could say a lot of this is just a reflection of leadership, and maybe that's true, but I like calling that out. And then the other thing that, if they start talking about employee engagement stuff, I'm wondering, where's culture on this? I mean, are they
Right.
are they talking about culture at all? Because we've done a massive global study when you wrote Culture Rules. And I mean, I don't remember how many CEOs we talked to, Mark, but thousands of people from all over the world, global study, you'll remember the numbers. But they all told us, I say all of them, the number one thing that was told to us over and over was culture is the number one thing you can work on to drive performance. And so I think culture feels to me like it might be missing on this list. I mean, what, you got thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I'll say two things about that. And the stats you're referring to, we found 67% of global leaders, 72% of U.S. leaders said that culture is the number one tool at their disposal to drive performance. So 7 in 10 basically are saying if you want to drive performance, you need to work on culture. So I agree with you. I feel like culture is conspicuous in its absence. Now, here's what I believe. If we were to talk to the folks that compiled this data, they'd say, oh, that's what the engagement and development piece is. Well, engagement is crucial and it's critical, and it's not culture. It's a facet. It's an element of culture. But if you want some other attributes, if you want innovation as part of your culture, then you've got to measure that. Now, I know innovation is on this list, but if you want accuracy, if you're building robots that are going to do human surgery and you want precision engineering to be part of your culture, well, that's fine. That's not engagement. And so I'm with you. I think that I would have to add the two that you said. I'd have to add something about culture. And again, I don't think you can measure culture generically. I think you've got to measure it based on the aspiration of the organization, as those examples attempt to illustrate. If you want to be known as a caring culture, then you've got to measure care, and so forth and so on. So I think I'd do something on culture. And I believe you've got to measure leadership, because none of this happens without leadership. It just won't happen. Now, we're going to move on, but let me go back and say, parenthetically, 7 out of 10 leaders, and probably 7 out of 10 of you who are listening, would give intellectual assent to the idea that culture is a driver of performance. Maybe you would be in the camp that says, yes, it is the primary driver of performance. But we asked those same global leaders to rank their priorities, and building and maintaining culture came in at number 12. To me, that explains the mess that most organizations have with their culture, because everybody's going to have one. It's either by design or default. Unfortunately, the ones that are built or allowed to self-build by default, they're never the good ones. They're never the ones that are thriving and vibrant, soul enriching, life-giving. That's not the kind of culture you get by default. So I would clearly have to add culture and leadership both to this list.
I thought it was funny when we read the results of the study, when you came back and said, I don't know about you, Randy, but I'm not working on my 12th priority very much. And that just, it explains exactly what you're saying. It's if we think it's important and we don't give any attention to it, you say all the time, no organization drifts to greatness, and that's just hoping it gets better. And that's just not going to happen. So I'm with you. I thought that one should have been on the list. One other thing I want to point out here that I thought was interesting was MasterCard. I mentioned they made this big jump into the top 5. You probably don't think of MasterCard as like they're one of the best companies in the world when it comes to management, but it was their innovation. Actually, the article talked about how their innovation was what pulled them to the top. And I read this comment by I think it was their chief innovation officer, a guy named Ken Moore. He described the company was a technology company that operates more broadly in commerce, not a commerce company, that has some technology. I mean, it's interesting to me that in their innovation, they're thinking we're not. I mean, most of us would think MasterCard is not a technology company, and yet they're sitting there going, no, we're a technology company. And so I think, Mark, the thing I would challenge everybody listening to ask themselves, and I'm not saying this is true, but I would say just push yourself to think we're a technology company. Now, you may be selling clothing out there, or we have companies that move cranes. We have exterminators we work with, insurance people, bankers, professional sports team. Are there things that you need to think about from a technology standpoint that would make you better at selling clothing or killing bugs or moving cranes or whatever? I mean, the technology space we know is not going to go away. It's one of the reasons this list is to me as eye-opening is where it's heavy at the top with these technology companies. We know AI is growing. It's I think all of us would do well to think through our technology. I know you and I are continually trying to do that ourselves, and we're not technology guys,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, if we're going to create the reach we're trying to do, obviously right here, technology, if somebody's watching on YouTube or, a podcast, whatever, we can be much more impactful with technology than we ever could. And, we just can't be in enough rooms to have the same reach. So that's just one little example there, but I think everybody listening, there's probably something to learn from Ken Moore's statement.
Yeah. So let me go back, just general observations. I know we've got some specifics we're going to get into here in a minute. I want to point out what some of our listeners have already connected the dots here. NVIDIA, just a couple of weeks ago, lost $600 billion in value in one day.
In one day. I heard that.
In one day. When DeepSeek, the Chinese startup, introduced their new AI model. Now, I don't know what that does to this list. I don't want it to diminish the fact that there are clearly some things that we can learn from NVIDIA, but I think it points out a risk and a challenge. So NVIDIA may be experiencing what Clayton Christensen out of Harvard talked about as the innovator's dilemma. And it's happened over and over throughout history. Again, I don't know how it would impact this list, but I couldn't resist sharing the idea because you and I have to be very careful. We may fall prey to the innovator's dilemma. The idea, oversimplified, is that market leaders often are ambushed by low quality, low cost competitors. And you think, well, really? I mean, how often does that happen? Well, it doesn't happen a lot, but one example of the innovator's dilemma came when mini computers faced personal computers. And the Digital Equipment Corporation owned the market for mini computers, but they failed to see the potential in personal computers. They said they're cheap, they're poor quality, they've got low speed, they're just inferior. There's no way they could ever threaten what we're doing. And of course, they missed the boat. You can go back to the classic example of Kodak actually invented the digital camera, but they said, no, we're in the film camera business. And all of a sudden, because they said the quality's so low in digital cameras, it'll never be as good as film, and they just missed it. It's what happened to Blockbuster when they were the market leader in providing movies for folks to watch in their homes. And they were approached by Netflix with this new idea, and they had a chance to buy them. And they said, no, that'll never work. What we've got is a superior model. And so when leaders think we've got the answer and all the other folks out there, particularly those low quality, low cost startups, aren't worth our time and attention, you can blink and not only lose your competitive advantage, in some cases, you can lose your business. Now, I'm not foreshadowing that for NVIDIA. I'm just saying that we've all got to be careful that we're working on the fringes. We're not just working on what made us great, because there are people out there who are really trying to come after you, whether you know it or not. So time will tell where NVIDIA shows up on this list next year or not. But Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma might be a read that you'd like to check out.
Yeah, it reminds me, Mark, you've talked about for years, one of the really the fundamentals of a leader is to be able to reinvent continuously. And we talk about reinventing yourself, reinventing your systems, reinventing your structures, your processes, your team. You could think about this on multi layers, but I love this innovation, reinvention mindset, doing things differently. I've said for the last year or so in so many events that better is always going to be different. If we want to be better this next year, it is going to require, by definition, that we do some things differently. And so I like that. Let me go back. Let me do this. Let me go back through the list again of the criteria. And I want you to comment on this, Mark. Customer satisfaction, innovation, social responsibility, employee engagement and development, and financial strength. We could almost say they represent a scorecard. Again, I think there's some things that are left off here. We mentioned those and some things that could be added. Maybe these don't need to be the things on your scorecard, but let's shift here for a second. I think there's so much power when we know, no matter how small we are, even what are we measuring? We've seen this over and over again. When people start measuring stuff starts getting better.
Yeah.
Anything you want to comment there with the power of a
scorecard? I think there's wisdom even in the criteria that were used for formulating this list. And it's a little bit of a balanced scorecard. And some of you may have heard that concept. Kaplan and Norton pioneered that work out of Harvard, and it's been picked up on many others. I heard Michael Porter at Harvard talk on this topic a few years back. And the concept is, you can say, well, we got a scorecard, but look at the list that Randy just went through. Are all of your metrics financial? Which it's great to have financial metrics and you need them, but that's not a balanced scorecard. It's only when you begin to bring these other metrics around that financial metric. You might even argue that is the top of the pyramid for you, or the bottom if it's a funnel. I don't know. I'm not talking about ranking or prioritizing. I'm just saying you're not getting a full view of your organization if you just have financial metrics. So one thing I do appreciate about the list that we're looking at here is that it is a balanced scorecard of sorts. There's an employee metric, a social responsibility metric, a customer metric, a financial metric, and you can see how that covers all views, with the exceptions that Randy and I both think culture and leadership should be included. So I would say if you've got a scorecard, be sure that it's not one-dimensional, because you greatly increase your risk of being blindsided.
I would even say, Mark, to take that further, making sure that the people around your table or all through your organization, there are some numbers that need to be known. And so the question I would ask is, what's your number one number? And I think if you start asking that question and you can answer that question yourself, by the way, if you can't answer it, nobody else can. But if you, the leader, know what the number one number is, start asking people what they think the number one number is. And I would almost bet the farm that there will be misalignment if you've not really talked about it per se. If you don't have that scorecard that's in front of people, making sure they have access. Who has access to those numbers? I mean, if your number is only revenue or profit or whatever, and that's all you're really focused on, and these other things, they're the enablers to give you that larger number to me. And so culture is an enabler of high performance. It's not, at the end of the day, it's not, let's have a great culture. It's going to lead to something, but I think sometimes we fail to move the numbers like we want to, because we don't know what the number one number is. And if we don't, like I said, nobody else has a clue.
Well, and so let me push on that just a little bit. I understand the power of the concept you're sharing, but in many cases, there are two numbers. There's the number that is the priority for the organization, whether it's the price of the stock for, the market, or whether it's profits or whatever. But then the second number in most cases is, what is the individual's focus? What is the individual's greatest contribution? What is it that individual deals with on a daily basis that contributes? If you're an offensive lineman, you might say the big number is wins at the end of the day, right? That's the team number. But my number is how many blocks do I execute successfully during a ball game. And I'm gonna work that number. So a lot of times I think I've seen where the number is applies to everyone, and then each role can have its own unique goal.
I like every role has a goal. We say that all the time, but it is what am I going to do to contribute to what it is we're trying to do? That's that mindset you're talking about. Okay, so if I'm a listener and I'm trying to get my head around this, and maybe we don't really have an agreed upon scorecard, you got a few tips here? I mean, I know you've built scorecards your whole career. Where would I start if I wanted to go down that road, or even make mine better?
Well, well, we've already foreshadowed that. It's probably a family of metrics. Let me say that. For a long time, I would probably over engineer or overthink or invest too much time and energy saying, is there a number? And again, there may be a primary number, but for a team, it's probably a small family of metrics. Now, people often ask me, well, how many? Well, I don't know your situation, but I think the answer is probably closer to 5 than 10. And then again, some of you would say, well, we measure a lot of things. I'm not saying you can't measure hundreds of things. We historically talk about page 1 and page 2 of the scorecard. Page 1 are those 3, 4, 5, 6 key metrics, those health indicators. And then on page 2, you track anything you want that will help drive those primary metrics. And to your earlier point, maybe there is a singular number that everything else is contributing to. And of course, if that's the case, people need to know it. So I would say think about a family of metrics. And 2, I would say hold it loosely, which may sound counterintuitive. I mean, there are probably some key metrics that will be unchanging in your organization or on your team, but the scorecard is a tool. And so if you need to put emphasis, focus, or priority on a problem or opportunity for a season, it may warrant inclusion on your scorecard. And then once you solve that problem or seize that opportunity, then I think you can have a really good conversation with your leaders about, okay, is there another metric that would be more valuable to include on our scorecard for this particular season?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Mark, years ago, to just drive home the power of this, you and I were doing an event, and we had a bunch of young leaders from Chick-fil-A, and if you recall, you rented out a bowling alley. I don't know how you got access to the bowling alley, but we rented the bowling alley, and it was a lot of fun. And we had all these young leaders that were coming on buses, and they were all excited. And the story was we got there beforehand, our team did, and they set curtains up over the pins. And so all these kids are coming in and they're getting their shoes and everything. They're all fired up, and we had them come up to the lanes, and they look, and all of a sudden all these pins are covered. They can't see the pins. And they're like, what are we doing? And you told them, well, we're going to bowl. So just go ahead and grab a ball and just roll the ball. And, this was hilarious. They're like looking at you like you're crazy, which you are crazy, but they're like, what are you talking about, dude? And so anyway, one guy gets courage up, rolls the ball, it's going down through there, and you can sort of, you see it go under the curtain, but you can hear some pins falling. Maybe you're not, again, it's maybe. And he turns around and says, I think I got a strike. And his buddy's like, no, I think you didn't hit, but maybe 2, or, they're arguing about it. And within a few minutes, their lanes are full and people are bowling these balls, and they're going under these curtains, and they're leaning down on the floor and trying to see under the curtains. And it was just hilarious. I say it was hilarious. It was hilarious for about 10 minutes until I thought all of them were going to quit. They were looking at you like, what are we, why are we doing this? This is totally stupid. And I remember you said, you're being paid to be here tonight, so you just need to roll the ball. And, they roll the ball, and we made them do this, Mark, for our listeners aren't going to believe this, but we literally made them do it for 45 minutes. And they were, I think they wanted to go.
They were angry.
Maybe or somewhere. You had a mutiny on your hands. It was crazy. And finally we put them over in the arcade, and we had pizza set up, and they had, a little break, and we removed the curtains, and And you could guess, if you're listening, what happened next was just like magic. They came back, and we had the next 90 minutes was just so much fun. Everybody bowled. We had the lights turned on, and everybody's keeping score, and they're talking smack. And it was huge. And there was a powerful moment at the end of the night. You gathered everybody together and had a microphone there. I don't know how you got a microphone in a bowling alley, but you had one, and you asked this question: how many of your people back in your restaurants, you're leading them week after week, and they're just going through the motions? They can't see the pins because you've not shared with them what really matters most. And I can only imagine, Mark, that in these companies that made this list, people have to know what's important, don't they? I mean, it's like, this is, to me, an opportunity for us to affect performance maybe like nothing else. I mean, this is huge if we get this point. And yet I'm guessing there are people who you're listening, and you know the score, and you know what's going on, but really nobody else knows what's important in their job or why it really matters. They're going through the motions, and we're wondering why we see these
blind bowling.
Yeah, they're blind bowling. That's a good way to say it. We're wondering why the U.S. engagement scores are down around 20% of people care about their job at this point. I think a lot of it has to do, they just don't know why it matters, or what, other than a paycheck every couple of weeks. It's just, I'm not sure what number matters. And so, to me, I didn't want to move on without calling that out. I mean, I thought that was such a powerful, just to be there and be a fly on the wall that night was pretty crazy. But I think companies could get so much better if they would just take the curtains away from the pins and let people see, this is really what we're trying to do. This is why it matters. This is how what you're doing contributes to what matters. And I believe this could be revolutionary in company after company. So I just want to kind of leave this part of the discussion there. You may want to comment on that.
Well, let me just two things I'll say in summary is you can obviously feel the vibe. Engagement went up immediately, which is great. I mean, people had a blast in that second round, and that's a good thing. But here's what's even more important. Performance improved. You can actually hit more pins when you can see them.
Yeah.
And when people know what's on the scorecard, you can actually drive both engagement and performance, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, Mark. So these last few weeks, we've been ending our show with a book recommendation, something that we've read that we think might even tie in sometimes. I think this one could tie into this conversation. You've got a book recommendation this week.
Well, I do have a book recommendation, but I think we've got to follow through on one thing you said in the opening. At least we need to touch on it. This list was built under the premise that these were the best 250 best managed 250 companies in America. And I think you foreshadowed we were going to talk about the difference in management and leadership.
Yeah, we need
our time is almost our time is almost up here, but let me say I'm a fan of both management and leadership, and I know you are. All great organizations require both. Now, the trick is if you're overmanaged, you won't accomplish near as much. And if you're overled, you won't accomplish near as much. You actually need both. So here's a simple way that I think about it, and simple is usually good for me, is that managers are focused on doing things right, and leaders are focused on ensuring that people are working on the right things. And of course, there's overlap. And every manager I know has some leadership in them, and every leader I know has some management in them. But we tend to have a bias that we are more leadership oriented or we are more management oriented. You need both. You need to do the right things, and you need to do them well. Last thing I'll say, most managers have a short-term focus, and most leaders, the best ones, have a longer-term focus. Again, we're dealing with nuance here and areas of gray, because the best leaders have a heads up and heads down orientation, but they do maintain a longer view. Managers tend to want to control. Leaders tend to want to release people to accomplish more and more. So again, we should probably do an entire episode on that, but this list, as titled by the Wall Street Journal and the folks who did the research, these are the best managed companies. Maybe we'll find another list of the best led companies and see how it's different.
Yeah, I'll give actually, I've got a picture there that I think will maybe be helpful to somebody listening here that's struggling to get up, heads up and heads down. I was actually having a conversation with your old leader, Dan Cathy, who was the former CEO, Truett Cathy's son of Chick-fil-A. Dan is retired from the business now. I say retired. He's doing all kind of stuff, but he's not leading Chick-fil-A per se anymore. But Dan, I saw him a few weeks ago and asked him the question, what you've been thinking about. And he said, I've got this question I keep asking myself, did my ears pop today? And I said, okay, what are you talking about? And he said, if you think about moving up to altitude, your ears will pop. And if you think about coming back down out of altitude, your ears will pop. He said, but if you stay at altitude all the time, you get acclimated and your ears don't pop. And so he was giving me this picture of basically I'm trying to move at a 30,000 foot view, looking out, where am I going, vision kind of stuff. But I also want to come back down and be in the trenches. And I think the best leader, manager, leader, however you want to say that, is very skilled at being able to move in and out and not get stuck in either place. And so I don't know, that picture, that question, did my ears pop today? That might be helpful to somebody out there as well. So anyway, good. I thought that might be helpful.
All right. I just thought I'd try to bring that home.
Yeah, that's good. Good check me on that. I love that. Okay. So you said something there at the beginning. You said, I like simple. I think that's a good segue into your, I think you got a book recommendation, right? This is good.
I do have a book recommendation. And I don't know if any of you listening will remember when Randy read that list of these top 250 best managed companies, Apple was at the top of the list. Well, I've been a fan of their products and their organization and Steve Jobs for many, many years. And I love this book. It's called Insanely Simple: The Obsession That Drives Apple's Success by Ken Segall. And Ken had the pleasure or the opportunity or the challenge in some cases to work with Steve for a decade. And I'll just share a couple things about the book. One is the core premise of the book. And Ken Segall says Apple's secret sauce was not Steve Jobs, which of course might sound like blasphemy to some of you that are huge Steve Jobs fans. He said, no. He said, what made Apple so successful during Steve's tenure was his maniacal focus on simplicity. Now, that encourages me because I'm not Steve Jobs. I don't want to be Steve Jobs, but I can pursue simplicity. Now, we don't want ever to let it become simplistic, right? Simple, but not simplistic. And this book is full of scores of examples where Steve Jobs challenged the organization. Can we do this more simply? And in some cases, he would even mandate, we must do this more simply. And so I think you would love this book. I'll read a quote from Steve and we'll kick it back to you, Randy. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. But it's worth it in the end because once you get there, you can move mountains. So I loved it. Again, I know there's some bias here. I have been a fan of keeping things simple for decades, but I think this book might inspire you to do the same.
I love that, Mark. I love that. I heard somebody say one time, simple is powerful. And I believe that with all my heart. If we can lock in on that idea of being insanely simple and having the right scorecard, having the things we measure, having people focused, it's amazing what can really happen. Mountains can move. I think that's a good way to say it. And yet if we just fly by the seat of our pants, it's the old chestnut checkers mindset, that you wrote about years ago. If we're just winging it, rarely do we reach our potential. I would say we never reach our potential if we just wing it. So I think the reason these companies are on this list is because they have some thoughtful, strategic, focused things going on. And I think there are some things that we can learn from all these companies. And I hope everybody listening will ask yourself, what can we do to get better? What can we learn from even this conversation, and who can you share this with, and maybe even have a conversation about some of the things that we've talked about today? I think there's some good things ahead for your company or business, whatever you have going on, if you'll focus on some of those things. We hope you'll continue to share with friends and family. If you've not checked us out on our YouTube channel, you can do that and watch all these episodes as well. Hit the subscribe button there, or just follow us for more content on any of our other channels. We're trying to serve leaders and help you get better. We really do believe that a world well led would just make things so much better. And yet it's really your world well led. If all of us will just do what we can to make it better in our world, it'll be so good for the people that are in our world. And that really is our heart. All right, we'll be back with you next week for another episode of the Lead Every Day Show. Remember, the best leaders lead every day.